DA.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for helping to be part of the solution, hopefully, with regards to the opioid crisis. I appreciate you working this. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate you making this a priority. You know, every time we go to any event where we talk about this and we ask for a show of hands, where someone knows someone or knows someone that has passed, you know, because of an overdose, it's always over 60, 65%. And seems like it just gets larger and larger. We had a real treat today, though. We're going to hear from Dr. Stephen Loyd, who I saw present down at the National Drug Endangered Children's Conference down in Nashville, Tennessee. And we brought him here. The talk was just amazing. There were some speakers, and Dr. Loyd was one of them. I'm not looking to embarrass him, but you just sit in your seat and go, oh my God, wow. And it's all about redemption, hope, and survival. One of the best lines I ever heard was from Amy Leone, talking about people that, you know, succumb again to the addiction. She said to me one day, she goes, Joe, we love repeats, because repeats have started down that road. They've had some hope, a moment of clarity. And I use that line all the time. One of the best things, we're always moving forward. And today we're going to talk a little bit about building a drug endangered children's coalition that's going to help protect kids from the trauma associated with having a parent with substance use disorder. These kids see things that no child should see. They see them shooting up. They see the overdoses. They see things that just aren't meant to be seen by a child. And as we learn more and more about the brain, we know that childhood trauma is very far-reaching, and the effects can be devastating. And it seems like we are at a certain point with physical health, but we're rapidly learning more and more with regards to mental health. I practiced mental health law for 17 years prior to becoming the district attorney. And the changes I saw over the 17 years were amazing. And I'm sure a lot of the textbooks they had by then, you know, wouldn't be used for much more than starting a fire in your fireplace, because everything has changed so much. The medications have changed so much. The way we look at this has changed so much. The ability to deal with the stigma has changed so much. And we know that the effects of the trauma, they're devastating in ways that a child is more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. If they witness domestic violence, they're more likely to become a perpetrator. And it also leads to a much higher percentage of young kids being addicted. So our office has always been about prevention. Our community outreach team is in the schools every day, talking to kids about things like alcohol and drug abuse, safe dating, number one most requested program, bullying and internet safety. And what we hope to do here is partner. And like, there's no I in team. When we work with all our partners, it's a force multiplier. That's the beauty of this opioid task force. We're over 700 strong, people from every walk of life, whether it be the private sector, the public sector, faith-based groups, medical community, government agencies, departments of public health. There's just so much that we do together, and really working together as a force multiplier. So what we need to do, as we're learning, is we need to provide support for children early. We need to detect the trauma, and we need to connect the police and the schools through our Handle with Care program, which we're going to be rolling out. What this does, it allows the police to send a short message to the school saying handle with care. Because a teacher may not know why a child is falling asleep, why they haven't done their homework, why they're not prepared for a test. And rather than put them into detention, they get a warm handoff, put their arm around that child and say, how you doing today? Because they've seen a lot. And just these type of things, the way that we're going to get better as a community. We're also looking to connect children experiencing trauma with our resources. When they need sources, when they need services, it's direct them to our community partners, because we got people that just love children, love what they do, and make it all better for all of us. So we know that preventing or lessening the trauma can have long-term effects on improving the lives of the children. And this effort is so important to them and the children's potential, because we know kids are 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future. If you're interested in joining our efforts, reach out to Liz Haddad, reach out to our office, Casey Shea, and we'll get us all working together. And we don't know oftentimes about your expertise till you tell us. We're also fighting crime over here, so we have to deal with some tough stuff. But before we get to Dr. Loyd, we're going to show a quick video of Chris's Corner Recovery Center. Our good friend Amy Leone down in Milford, Hurricane Amy. And I wanted to turn it over to Amy to introduce this video.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, DA. So I'm Amy Leone from Community Impact in the Regional Substance Navigation Program and Chris's Corner. And so I just wanted to give everybody just an idea of, what Chris's Corner is and how it was developed. So the Regional Substance Navigation Program is a police department model in which police officers and a therapist help individuals access treatment. And so this is where it all started. And those are embedded within the police departments within Hopedale, Milford, Upton, Mendon, and Medway. And the mental health professionals and recovery coaches from Community Impact and work with those individuals who are struggling with substance use. And we also work with the families and the children. So what our main purpose of the Regional Substance Navigation Program was to provide that direct linkage to the recovery centers, medication assisted treatment, or other services to make those people successful with the correct level of care that they needed. And so we always have worked with it as a four-pronged approach with intervention, treatment, follow-up, and most important, like our community partnerships. So as like all of our efforts that we were talking about and that the DA mentioned, these are all coordinated and, interdependent effort, amongst law enforcement and throughout the communities that we work with. So as a result of all of our efforts through the Regional Substance Navigation Program, we were able to get a newly established Recovery Resources Center, which is called Chris's Corner Recovery Resource Center, in collaboration with District Attorney, and it's funded through a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And so our center was named after Chris Swindell, which was one of our members that we had worked with. And the parents really wanted to take this tragedy and make it into something positive. And as everything happens, relationships form over the years. And as we talk about that this is a family disease, we really became very close with Chris's family. And we're able to honor his name in this center. So this Chris's Corner offers, recovery-oriented services, support, and resources to really help those that are in recovery improve their health and wellness. We want them to live that self-directed life and reach their full potential. Our mission is not to just support those on their path of recovery, but our mission is also to help lay that foundation for a life of happiness after their addiction. So where we talk about, you'll see in a minute, the video, Chris's Corner is really a place where recovery meets reality. Our motto is no shame, no judgment, just truth. And you'll be able to see, as you hear from my staff and, see the center itself, just what Chris's Corner is really all about. So we would have loved to have an in-person open house, but in this world, we're doing it virtually through this video. So I want to thank, Casey for doing this video. It was really great for us to be able to, and there's some other parts that will come in the future with it. Because my staff really, this all could not be possible without my staff that we have. So you'll get to meet them in this video. So enjoy it.
Thanks. And Amy, what's your motto down there again? No
No
shame,
shame, no judgment, just truth.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. And I got to throw a shout out to Casey Shea for putting this together. Casey's and anyone listen, don't you dare try and steal her. She's one of the most talented people we brought into the office, and she's made us all better. And I mean, don't try and steal her. All right.
We had 3 children. Chris was the middle child.
He was a typical boy. He was all boy, very busy, loved sports, loved soccer.
If you can read about, his accolades. There's a, team captain, leading goal scorer, started varsity as a freshman. This might have been the beginning of his challenges and his problems, because Chris suffered an awful lot of broken bones growing up. What's unfortunate is back then, when you got injured, they prescribed you painkillers.
The trouble didn't start till college, and when he started having issues, he hooked up with Amy.
You know, he was sober for months, and then all of a sudden we got the classic 1:43 a.m. Friday, July 13th phone call in the middle of the night, and you know, something that you never forget. How do we get here, right? How do we get to Chris's corner? There's no greatest devastation that you could suffer than the loss of a child. I was talking to Amy shortly afterwards, and I just said, you know, I got to do something with this pain. I got to make a positive out of this pain. I said, I really would like to help the people in the community, those in recovery, those are trying to recover. And then she ended up hooking up with the Joseph
Mr. Early.
right, and the Department of Justice and everybody else, and they put in a federal grant. The grant came through, and here we are.
So I'm Amy Leone. I am the owner of Community Impact. The former police chief, Tom O'Laughlin, and myself, we worked on implementing the Regional Substance Navigation Program. And what it was that we respond to every overdose that happens in the community, and we respond to the hospitals with the detectives, and also provide those individuals and their families any type of support that they need. So that kind of evolved into knowing that, okay, we can give all of these people these services, and we can respond, and we can do all of this, but we have no place for them to go once they are released from whatever that program is. So that's where the evolution of Chris's Corner came from. And so this is where the Recovery Resource Center was kind of born as the next initiative of what this community needed. When you look at the array of resources that we have, we really look at it from an eclectic perspective. We have a lot of different avenues of recovery and getting back on your feet. We look at the person, they may have a struggle, but we're looking at the whole person, not just what that struggle is. And we're really looking at helping individuals as a whole, not just their drug addiction, their homelessness, mental health. That's just a piece of who they are. That isn't who that person is.
We have a lot of community events, we do groups, we do workshops, and it's basically for everyone. We've done things for people specifically in recovery. We've done book clubs, we've done kids worry groups, basically yoga, meditation, like energy, movement. So it's a lot of skill-based things. It's life skills.
So I think a lot of the groups are so important for people in recovery, especially during this pandemic, because everybody's been so isolated. So I think the groups have been amazing, and just being there and having other people who are going through the same thing is so important.
To bring the communities together and for the outside world to understand that the recovery community, they're just the same as everybody else. Like, I don't want anybody to think that they're ever alone, because they're not. There are so many people out there who are struggling, and for years I hid that. But it's just, no one should be alone doing it.
People at Chris's Corner, we all care so deeply about our job, and a lot of us have been touched one way or another by substance abuse. And so I think just the availability that our staff has made available to the clients in the community of just, okay, if you're ready, like, we're here, you don't have to wait.
Okay, we have resources to help you with whatever you're going through, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's therapy, whether it's a family-related issue.
One thing that sets Chris's Corner aside from probably other recovery centers is that we have case management, we have recovery coaches, and we have mental health counselors that are here to be able to provide those short-term supports. Whether it's, Renee picking up food from Salvation Army and bringing it to some of the homeless, or having it here for them, or somebody needing clothes and all of, Brittany getting those together, so it's really from a holistic perspective, like you said, that we're able to help where that person is.
Did we get started? Really, back in 2015, it all started when we started taking a different approach to the opioid crisis and understanding that it was a very complex disease of the brain and not a moral failing or a character flaw, which led us to start looking for grants because we saw the number of people that were dying every year. And as we saw it continue to multiply, we saw a perfect ally in Chris's corner in terms of providing services, helping steer people towards treatment rather than a jail cell. And it was a natural fit with the Milford Police and Amy Leone, because they were ahead of the curve on so many things, doing so much good work down here, that we figured we could improve on that by partnering, getting some federal funding, and coming out with this federal grant.
Milford Police, we've been involved with Amy Leone going back, close to 20 years under Chief O'Loughlin. We've always had diversion programs, whether it's formal or informal. We try to keep, children out of the courts, certainly out of jails. In the event there's any issues in there, we can work with the parents and talk to the parents and see if whatever behavior is going on. And we have outreach through Amy's office and anything informal we can do. We work closely with the Milford Youth Center. I have officers assigned over there for after-hour programs. We're not just there when there's a problem. We try to be there just so they can reach out and get to know the police officers on a more informal basis, more friendly before bad things happen. It's kind of a community policing approach that we've had in this department, in this town for a very long time. Our department was probably one of the first departments in the state to train officers and carry Narcan. We were definitely ahead of the curve on that. We have saved lots of lives in this community.
If you ask the chief or anyone in law enforcement 25 years ago, did you think your officers, or how about the district attorney, would be carrying around Narcan? Because it's just the chance of saving someone's life every day. And I'm sure the answer would have been no. But now you take this now and it really is a lifesaver. So the nice thing about this partnership is you've got the district attorney's office, the Milford Police Department, and Chris's Corner all coming together out of Chris's death, out of a tragedy, coming together to provide the most up-to-date, clinically proven, evidence-based way to fight this horrible disease. Last year, we lost 93,000 people during the pandemic to this disease. And I think everyone understands we've got to do better. And that's what I think everyone working together down here does.
I think that the community has really embraced the fact that when we see a need for change, we actually follow through and do it. This is not an individual problem, a police problem, or a family problem. It's a community problem. So as a community, they've embraced that, and we were able to do that for all the regions that we work with. So, every community embraced that whole philosophy.
Remember, the light at the end of someone's tunnel could be you.
Amy, thank you so much. See a need and we change it. Does it get any better than that? What you guys are doing down there, really, you're ahead of the curve. We're learning from you on so many different things, especially, when we applied for that federal grant. And I know the Congressman McGovern was helpful. Congressman Kennedy was helpful. And Senators Markey and Warren were also helpful getting that money. But everyone coming together. So I've already spoken too much. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. And I wasn't going to read off the resume, but this is so impressive, I have to. Recently, Stephen Loyd was the medical director and assistant commissioner for substance abuse services for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. As we all know, mental health and substance abuse go together. For the last 10 years, and this is huge, he has focused on addiction medicine with an interest in opioid-dependent pregnant patient. Anyone who's been in the NICU unit and has heard the screams of these children know that, it is gut-wrenching. He's currently the medical director for Cedar Recovery of Middle Tennessee, with locations in Mount Juliet, Lebanon, Columbia, and Shelbyville, Tennessee, as well as serving for the vice president of Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. He has been in recovery from addiction to opioids and benzodiazepines since July 8th of 2004. And Dr. Loyd is going to share his own powerful story of recovery with us today. It got to me. And as I mentioned, This message, his message needs to be heard, especially when it comes to the removal of stigma around addiction, because as we all know, you don't talk to any expert that says, first thing we've got to do is remove the stigma. Dr. Loyd.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to do my best, guys. We'll see how this goes. All right, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
I can
We can
hear
now,
you.
doctor.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
can
I
now.
can now.
Okay.
Yep,
And my screen is up.
your screen
You're
is
up.
up.
All right, it won't let me. I promise you, Elizabeth and I practiced this before we got on. It won't let me advance or go backwards.
Oh, there we go.
All right, here you go. Let's go to a happy picture before I get to the tough stuff. First of all, thank you guys for having me so much. I never know how these things are going to go, particularly when they're on a Zoom. And then, in dealing with people who speak a different language than I do, sometimes it's even tougher. And my goal in my life right now is to learn how to say the word partner like Joe says it. It's just awesome. At any rate, a couple of things before we get started, and I told the folks who are on, Elizabeth and Amy, I'm bald. I'll let you look at me. Sorry. And when we started doing Zoom talks, I would get focused on the bald guy because I'm not sure who that is. The guy I know is me, has a full head of hair. And so I wear a hat, and today I'm wearing the hat of my Atlanta Braves, who won the World Series, who actually started out in Boston as the Boston Braves. So there is a Massachusetts connection. And when I come into these things, I never know what I'm bringing to the table. I always, I get some quiet time like I did this morning, and I want to bring my authentic self. I want to bring exactly what I have. I don't want any pretenses. I don't want any me focus. And as you all know, sometimes that's really, really hard to do. And that's what I want to bring this morning, because I've already been put in an emotional blender by what we were talking about before we got on, and then watching the video for Chris's house. A little bit of symmetry. Chris passed away on July 13th in the morning. July 13th is the day over 17 years ago that I walked out of a detox unit, coming out of addiction to opioid pain medication, OxyContin and Xanax. And so, when I saw that date pop up, I immediately went back there, and that guy who walked out, and it was in the middle of July in Tennessee, which is really, really hot and humid, not much different than Massachusetts. And I had on a sweatshirt and sweatpants because I was freezing to death. And I thought my medical career and I thought my life as a husband and father were over. I had no idea what I was getting ready to embark on over the past 17 years, and what a gift that's been. But I had a lot of advantages, and we're going to talk about some of those today. I want to start off. Thanks, Joe, for the introduction. It was really kind. And I appreciate it so much. And we're not going to move the needle at all in the things that we all care so much about until we start to shed the stigma associated with addiction and mental health issues. And you can give us all the resources and all the money, and people will do that. They will throw money at things, and that's a good thing. We do need resources. But the most ineffective treatment that anyone has ever prescribed is one that they won't ask for or won't step into. And until we get rid of the stigma around addiction and mental health issues, people are going to die needlessly in isolation and shame, and I'm not okay with that anymore. I'm a TV show guy and a book guy, and I love sports. And so my current favorite show is Ted Lasso. So if you're not watching Ted Lasso, watch it. It's not a potty humor sitcom. Ted Lasso is way deeper than anybody wants to know. And right here on my computer, I've got one of my favorite Ted Lasso quotes. Ted, as he's throwing darts in a scene, says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I'm curious. And the neat thing about what I get to do every day is I get to step into people's lives and I get to learn about them. And I love that. So I'm going to start off with a couple of stories before we get into the meat of our talk. I'm going to share things with you as we go through what I want to talk about today, about my own addiction and about the things that I saw as a result of that going forward. And then I don't want anybody to walk away with this without knowing that I get treated differently. I have addictive disease. I've had it basically my entire life. I come from a long family of people with substance use disorders and mental health disorders, most of which never received treatment. I grew up in that, in rural East Tennessee, in the foot of the Appalachian Mountains in rural East Tennessee. If y'all ever, I guess the most famous thing around us, one, we're the birthplace of country music. And second of all, we have a huge NASCAR race in Bristol, and not Bristol, Connecticut, but Bristol, Tennessee. So that's where I'm from. And so that's what I grew up in. That's what I grew up with. I grew up in the Bible Belt, and I'm not putting religion or spirituality to the side at all. That's how I grew up, and I grew up in this judgmental nature of going to church every Sunday night, every Wednesday. And when we walked in that church as a family, we looked great in the family photo. And my mom played the organ, and my dad was an elder in our church. He prayed over communion. But when we walked out of that church, it was World War III. And nobody knew that. Nobody knew the mental health issues that we had in my nuclear family. Nobody knew the abuse that me and my sister were subject to. But by gosh, when we walked in that church, we looked great. And that's part of our problem. And so I'm going to talk about medication today because it gives us a way to keep people alive. And Amy, I love what you said. And I tell people this all the time. You're talking about the repeaters. We love repeaters. I tell folks all the time, I love calls from jails and hospitals, because I can't deal with the call from the morgue. Jails and hospitals, I got another chance. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about giving people a chance at life until we can help their brain recover from the disease of addiction and mental health issues. That's what we're talking about. And guys, I will do anything that helps that. I'll use anything. I tell folks, if we had evidence that rubbing chicken crap across somebody's upper lip would decrease their cravings and help us keep them alive, then I would open up a clinic, and that's what we would do. And we have evidence-based medications that we know can keep cravings at bay and help people find the path to recovery that's right for them. And that's what I'm all about. So sorry about the little bit of crudeness there. We'll start off with this. The opposite of addiction is not recovery. The opposite of addiction is community and relationship. That's the deal. And that's what we're talking about. And that's what we're talking about building. And as Joe went through the different pieces of this puzzle that you all are pulling together in Massachusetts, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about relationship and community. And unfortunately, sometimes we're working in silos that prevent those things from happening. And I think that is a challenge for us. I want to tell you about a program that we have in Tennessee before I get into what you see on your screen there. And I think it illustrates the importance of what we're talking about. And so we have a jail program here in East Tennessee. Actually, I live in Nashville. My home, where I grew up, is about 4 hours east of here on the North Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky lines in the corner of Tennessee that makes a little tip. And there's a judge up there named Dwayne Sloan. And Dwayne is a judge in the 4th Judicial District. When I met him about 6 years ago in Cincinnati, and I mentioned medication to help people with opioid use disorder, I thought I was going to have to fight him. His head almost came off of his shoulders. And if you all know Judge Sloan, he's built like a block of cheese. I don't want any part of him. But the thing that amazed me is no matter that reaction that he had, we went to dinner that night, and he said, "Steve, tell me what you're talking about." And so over the past 6 years, Judge has become one of my best friends. He's my accountability partner. I talk to him every single day. And we have a program in rural Tennessee where we are initiating MAT at time of booking as folks with substance use disorder come into our jail system. And we have fought everything in the world in order to do that. And the biggest problem that I've had has been with the jail medical staff, not the COs, not the sheriff, not any of the people in the criminal justice system. It's actually the people delivering the medical care. So when we were talking to them about this program, and I was in the jail talking to them, I sit there for almost an hour and listen to the medical staff, the people who have the license that I have, that I've got hanging on my wall behind me here. And I listen to them tell stories and laugh at folks who were sneaking things like Suboxone and methadone into the jail in their body cavities. And I still don't have any words for that. The desperation that somebody would have in order to do that amazes me. The first talk I gave to the Tennessee Sheriff's Association, I said, I can stop all that. I can stop it tomorrow. And they were like, how do we do that? And I said, let's give it to them. Let's treat them. And I about got kicked out of the room. And now we're actually doing that. But as you sit there and you listen to medical staff who are responsible for medical care of our patients, and that's the view that they have of taking care of the folks that we're trying to help and reach and communities that we're trying to change, that's the challenge. I don't have any problem with the head of the jail. I don't have any problem with the COs. They all know this because they've seen these kids come in and out of the system so many times. And the other thing is, you all know this. This is a family disease. This is a genetic disease. They knew their moms and dads. They were coming in and out of the system 10 years ago or a generation ago. So I want to start with an illustration of that, and then we'll get rolling. So I did an admission not long ago, and thank God for telehealth. Please don't let that go away. If you know politicians who have influence on that, it gives us a way into places we would never have a way into. I can do jail admits on this computer and then meet the patients as they come out of jail in a warm handoff. This is a godsend, and we have to have this tool. So I admitted a patient not long ago, actually just a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to call her Jennifer. And as I took Jennifer's history, and that's one of the great things I get to do because I get a kick out of it. I love it every single time because I don't want to hear anybody's story of redemption until I hear their story of heartbreak. And I love that people let me inside and let me see what's in here. And I'm going to try to do that for you guys today. But I got to talking to Jennifer, and Jennifer didn't start out with drug use. Her parents both suffered from the disease of addiction, methamphetamine, cocaine, and later prescription pain medication and heroin. And you all know that story all too well. And Jennifer's first touched by this as a young girl because her mom would get in dope debts. She would owe people for the drugs that she was using, and she started to farm. These aren't my words; these are Jennifer's. She started to farm Jennifer out when she was 5 years old to settle her drug debts, and Jennifer was farmed out basically her entire adolescent and teenage years. And keep in mind the whole time going to public school systems and then, county high schools. And so, you never know what somebody is going through in their own home. And I think about that with Jennifer. So Jennifer has been in and out of the system, as you guys can guess, multiple times. This time when she came in, she was hallucinating from methamphetamine that had been laced with fentanyl, and we're going to talk about that. And they had her with schizophrenia and everything else in the book. And I get so tired of watching people giving the diagnosis of schizophrenia and all of these mental health disorders whenever they're under the influence of things like methamphetamine. Let's wait till we get them off the methamphetamine and let's see who the person is we're dealing with. But she had all of these things hung on her. And as I started to talk to her, she is in jail uniform. So it's basically burlap sack with the black and white stripes. And she's sitting there and she's squirming like this. And I said, Jennifer, are you okay? And she said, Dr. Loyd, I'm itching. And I said, what are you itching from? And she says, well, I don't have any underwear. So Jennifer was sitting there in a burlap jail uniform with no panties and no bra. And she's in her late 20s now. And she's looking at a screen while I'm looking at mine, and she keeps going in and out. And I asked her about that. I said, Jennifer, what are you doing? And she said, I can't see you. So Jennifer wears glasses. So when she came into the jail, her glasses are steel framed, and you can't have steel in the jail. So they took her glasses. And so when we talk about trying to help people with substance use disorder, I want us to think about all of our healthcare, everybody on this call, all 60 of you who are participants in our 5 people on the presentation panel here. If you think about our overall healthcare, this 100% ball, only 5% of it, a little bitty pie slice, is access to somebody like me or a hospital or whatever. 95% of our overall healthcare, including everybody on this call, is something called social determinants of health. Guys, it's underwear. It's bra and panties, it's glasses, it's a safe place to lay your head at night where somebody's not going to hurt you. It's living in a place where you're not farmed out as a kid to pay somebody's debts. Those are social determinants of health. What I do is a small little piece. And frankly, if I just concentrated on that small little piece and it was about medicine, I'd quit this job in 5 minutes. It'd be boring as heck. What I've really learned is I'm a social worker. And I love being a social worker. And if we're going to make an impact on the population that we're talking about, it's going to take more than just one office or one department in a state government or even a federal government. It's going to take all of us to pull together these social determinants of health to give our folks a chance at recovery. So we pulled together some things for Jennifer. She actually had an optometrist. The local drug coalition had gotten her some glasses. So we found the optometrist, and I got on the phone with a young lady who was in her 20s, and I said, hey, I need you to pick me out some frames that are stylish, and I'm 54 and I can't do it. So she picked me out some nice frames, and we actually had her prescription. So we had her some glasses made with plastic frames, and we had it delivered to jail. And my wife and I went shopping. We went shopping for underwear. And we boxed it all up and we sent it to the jail. And our patient now has glasses and has underwear. That's a good start, guys. Sometimes we need to start with glasses and underwear, and we can get into the other stuff. So I got her on Suboxone in jail. She's on 1 a day, and she's done really well. And amazingly enough, she doesn't have symptoms of schizophrenia anymore. She's not seeing things. She's not, going off in a land that we're all not, probably none of us. I'm familiar with it. Probably you guys are not. But she's not doing that at all. And one of the drugs she's on is Seroquel that was prescribed by a local mental health provider. And the jail staff, the jail doctor who saw her after she's doing well, told her that he was going to have to take her off of her Seroquel because you couldn't prescribe it with Suboxone. That is not true. There is absolutely nothing true about the statement that I just gave. And he's doing that in order to punish her and make her choose between her mental health medication and the medication that's keeping the cravings at bay so that she stops using intravenous heroin and fentanyl. And I'm kind of proud of myself on this one because I went after her. And I'll tell you this morning that when she was taking the medical, that she got both her Seroquel and her Suboxone. We're expecting her out here in about a month. And when she comes out, she will come directly to me. It won't be a cold handoff. It won't be handing her a telephone number or a meeting list. She'll have my number, and I'll know the second she walks out of that jail, we'll have somebody there to meet her. And we will get this young lady to our place and get her evaluated for her proper level of care. When we start talking about things like that, instead of just handing something to somebody and expecting them to show up or passing it off that we don't have the resources to do whatever it is to get them where they need to be, then we'll start moving the needle on treatment. And I'm going to talk about prevention, but I hadn't planned on that at all until Joe started talking, because that's the perfect illustration of what we're talking about. Now, the flip side of Jennifer is what you have on your screen here. And so we're going to start with this picture. This is not the young lady you just saw. Back in November 1st of last year, I opened a methadone clinic in a county in Tennessee called Cock County. A little bit about Cock County. It is the second poorest county in our state. It is on the border with North Carolina. So if you know anything at all about Tennessee, it's Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which bleeds over into North Carolina. When you cross from Tennessee into North Carolina, the last little town you cross through is Newport. Newport is in Cock County. So to give you some kind of idea about what Cock County is like, the name of the high school, instead of tigers, lions, and bears, they're the Fighting Cocks. And the reason they're the Fighting Cocks is because Cock County is famous for chicken fighting. And it still goes on to this day. So that'll give you a little bit of the mindset. It's made national TV shows a few times because they still have churches in rural Cock County that handle snakes. That actually still exists. So that's the county that we're talking about. So guys, I didn't know the first thing about methadone, nothing. I've been in addiction medicine for about 12 years. I've treated over 500 women who are pregnant and have delivered while having substance use disorder. I mean, that's the world that I know. I knew nothing about methadone at all. But Judge Sloan wanted a clinic that we could work with in our court, in our jails, in the 4th Judicial District. And so I took my life savings and I opened the clinic. And my wife was about ready to shoot me. I think she still is about ready to shoot me. And I would actually see patients. And they were coming down the hall, and I'm in the back reading my book. Tell me how to do this. I haven't had any training, but there's nobody else to help these folks. You'll be happy to know I don't have to read my book in between every patient now. And now you know a little bit of the secret about doctors, because my guess is your doctor does the same thing sometimes, only they've got a computer and look it up that way. But this patient is patient number 6. I had her, let's call her Jennifer too. So I got Jennifer, and I didn't see this until I'd had her for 2 weeks. Now, she is injecting 5 grams of heroin per day. And as you all know, when I drug screen her, she's got very little heroin in her system and almost all fentanyl. Okay, almost all fentanyl. So she's injecting 5 grams of heroin and fentanyl daily. And I had known her for about 2 weeks, and she asked to see me. She said, Dr. Loyd, I need to see you. I said, sure, come on back. Now, when we see patients the first time, we have all injection drug use, all. We don't have anybody snorting, eating. It's all injection drug use. So I've gotten really good about looking for sites, right? Neck, things you don't think about, neck, subclavian in women, breast, genitalia, men, genitalia, feet, between toes, underneath watch bands. I mean, you name it. And guys, everything I learned from people with substance use disorder or dope dealers. That's where I learned all this. And so I get her back there, and we start talking, and we've done an exam. We've looked at it. I've got a nurse that does the private exam, and then I do everything else. I've looked everywhere, guys. I didn't think to look at the shin. I've never seen anybody inject into the shin. I never thought of it. And she was wearing pants. And she said, I've got something I need to tell you about, Dr. Loyd. And she rolled her pant leg up, and I saw what you're seeing on your screen right now. And you don't need any medical training at all to know that that's bad. That needs to be in the hospital. That needs IV antibiotics. Anybody can recognize that. And so keep in mind, this is a 30-year-old young lady, and she's got a scar from here to here. Why do people have scars from here to here? Because they had open heart surgery. Okay. So she's 30 years old, and she's already had open heart surgery, and she had it secondary to valvular heart disease caused by infective endocarditis. What does that come from? So injection drug use takes bacteria from your skin into your bloodstream. If you get to a point where you get immunocompromised, can't fight it off, then those bacteria start to attach to your heart valve, and then it lays down a layer of platelets, and then more bacteria, and then more platelets. And the next thing you know, you've got this vegetation hanging off of your heart valve, flopping with every heartbeat, that's just spraying bacteria through your whole body. That's what endocarditis is. It has a 50% mortality rate. That means that 50% of the people get it, don't live through it, no matter what you do. So she was young and otherwise healthy. She got open heart surgery. They replaced that heart valve because they couldn't get that vegetation off. They couldn't control it with IV antibiotics. And they sent her out of the hospital. The diagnosis that she left the hospital with was valvular heart disease, secondary to injection drug use, status post tricuspid valve replacement. And I'm telling you, that diagnosis is crap. What's her diagnosis? Her diagnosis is substance use disorder secondary to opioids, mainly heroin and fentanyl. That is her diagnosis. It would be, Joe, I'm sorry, but you have a little bit of white hair, so I'm going to pick on you. So Joe comes into the hospital, and he's got 3-vessel coronary disease. He's having chest pain while he's riding his Peloton at home. All right, and so we light him up with an angiogram. We put stents in Joe's heart, and we send Joe out of the hospital, tell him good luck. That's not how that happens. Now, we do all of that, but then we say, hey, Joe, you've got some risk factors that are leading you to get this heart disease. You've got high blood pressure. You're working too much. Your cholesterol, your LDL is 150. So we got to get you away from the, Philly cheesesteaks and clam chowder. Okay, whatever it is. All right. So we treat the underlying disease so that this disease does not progress. Right, guys, it's the same thing with addiction. The underlying problem here is not the valvular heart disease. The underlying problem is the addiction itself. Okay, you say, well, she had her heart valve replaced. She has to know how serious this is. Surely this will stop her from using. How long do you think that Jennifer lasted when she got discharged from the hospital before she stuck another needle in her body? How long do you think she made it? One day. We spent thousands and thousands of dollars to replace her heart valve, and we did nothing to treat her underlying medical condition. So Jennifer goes about injecting drugs, and she's injecting them all over. She finally starts using her legs. She was injecting into this right before I got her. I looked at this and I said, Jennifer, this needs to be in the hospital. She said, Dr. Loyd, I was in the hospital. She was at a big teaching institution not far from where Newport is, and they were giving her IV antibiotics. She's shooting 5 grams of heroin and fentanyl per day. How do you think she started to do in the hospital on days 2 and 3 after not having her heroin and fentanyl? She didn't do well at all. She starts to go into acute withdrawals, i.e. she gets dope sick. The hospital doesn't have any idea how to handle dope sickness. They don't have an addiction service that could come in. I could have solved that in literally 5 seconds I could have made her comfortable. I could have gotten her off nursing staff's back. Whenever you're dope sick, you're not thinking. The only thing you want when you're dope sick is what you're addicted to. That's it. And you'll do anything to get it. I understand that. And I'm going to teach you guys that here shortly. So how do you think the hospital reacted? What did they do? They kicked her out. I want to know another medical condition that you get kicked out of a hospital for. I want somebody to tell me that, because I don't know it. I've worked in the hospital my entire career. I've never seen a condition that we kick people out of the hospital for. So she gets kicked out. She knows she needs antibiotics. I said, honey, you need to be on antibiotics. She said, I am. I'm on Clinda something. So I thought, oh, good, clindamycin. That's good. So the next day I had her bring her medication in. And I normally don't do that because we have electronic medical record, but I wanted to see it. And she brought it in, and indeed she did have clindamycin. So she had Googled on her computer antibiotics for skin infection, and clindamycin popped up. Only her clindamycin was in a blue box about this big, and it had fish on it. It was clindamycin, all right, for guppies, for your fish tank. A guppy weighs about 1/10 of an ounce, and she weighs about 150 pounds. So we took medical care for her, and her option was a pet food store. And guys, this is the kind of stuff that's got to stop. This can't happen. It can't happen in our country. It shouldn't happen anywhere in the world. And so luckily for us at that time, we got the $4 Walmart list. We put her on Augmentin and clindamycin, only instead of for guppies, this was for human beings. It took us 4 months. We got her leg healed up. And I want to tell you just a tiny bit more about her, because all you hear is the 5 grams of heroin a day. She's got an 11-year-old son that she's lost custody of. When I see my patients and I get them out of being dope sick, there's 2 things I want to know from every one of them. One, I want to know a short-term goal. Give me a short-term goal, something you can accomplish in the next day or the next 2 days or the next 5 days. And then I want to know a long-term goal. And Jennifer's long-term goal was to get custody of her son back. He's 11. Does she need custody of her son back right now? No, it's not what I'm arguing for. It's not a safe environment for him. But that's a good goal to work towards. She has not lost permanent custody. And about a month ago, Jennifer come in smiling from ear to ear. She always comes back and hollers at me. And she has been granted 1 day of weekend supervised visitation with her son. Guys, that's good stuff right there. That's good. That's good enough to get up and come to work for. Now, it's not her final goal. So now that's her short-term goal. Her short-term goal, I went over with it. Her short-term goal is to keep that. Do the things where you keep that, and let's build towards 2 days of supervised visitation, and we'll go from there. And I wanted to start with her story because this is the medical system that we're dealing with. And when I heard Joe talking just a little while ago, and I hear what's in his voice, and I know things that are real and not real, what I heard was real. The truth is I see more kindness and compassion from elected officials, from law enforcement, from the judiciary, from the folks who are on this call that I see in my own profession. And the truth is we started most of this. 70% to 80% of all heroin and fentanyl users right now got their start with prescription medication. 70, 80%. And guys, that prescription medication came off of guys like me's prescription pads. And so we need to step into this wholeheartedly, and we need to be part of the problem. We need to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. This young lady you have in front of you, her name is Brooke Sargent. Brooke is one of my friends. This picture was taken about 7 hours before I met Brooke. When I first started getting involved in addiction medicine, and I'm an internal medicine doctor by trade, intensivist. I work in the hospital. I've done it my whole career. I am not a trained addiction medicine doctor. I am not a trained psychiatrist or psychologist. But I've got a lot of on-the-job training and a whole lot of reading. Okay, and so when I left the state, I worked for then Governor Bill Haslam. I was his first drug czar in the state of Tennessee. That was my unofficial title, and I would be lying to you if I told you I didn't like being called a czar. I did. I'm no longer a czar, so I'm having to deal with that. But when I left the state, our new governor, Bill Lee, came in, and governors will bring their own folks, and I didn't know if that was going to happen, but I wanted to get back out to seeing patients. The time I spent in state government was good, but it'll also grind you down. And so I took a job at a place that was going to allow me to start an inpatient treatment program for pregnant women who were dependent upon IV drugs. And if you look around the country, there's not many of those. Matter of fact, it's a really, really short list. So back when I first got started, I would hear people talk about pregnant women, and they would say the worst things in the world about them if they were using. And then I would listen to that, and I was thinking, gosh, these women are horrible. And then I would say, well, tell me what you're doing in your treatment program to help them. And they said, well, we don't take them. And I said, well, how can you say those things about them if you're not offering any avenues to solution? And I said, what if you get somebody who's early in their pregnancy, they're in your treatment program, and then you find out they're pregnant while they're there? Do you know what they do with those? They kick them out. I don't know of anything else that we kick pregnant women out for. I mean, this is, it doesn't make sense, but it's the system that we have. So I started an inpatient treatment program at a place in Murfreesboro, which is just south of Nashville. And I started taking drug-dependent pregnant women, and it was a lot of fun. So Brooke lives in Southern Ohio, about 7 hours away from Murfreesboro. She found out she was pregnant. She was about 8 weeks pregnant when this picture was taken, and she was injecting heroin and, as you know, fentanyl. And from looking at this picture, you can probably also guess that she's using methamphetamine. And so Brooke and her mom got on the computer. They Googled places that would take her, and my name popped up. They called me, and I said, bring her here. So Brooke's mom took this picture right as they were getting in the car, right before they come to meet me. And just a little bit about Brooke. Brooke is the toughest patient that I've ever had. And I've worked in jails, prisons. I've worked basically everywhere. I've worked with people who are actively using. I work with people who continue to use to this day. I've worked with drug dealers, gangsters, you name it. I've worked with them. This is the toughest patient that I ever had. She's a certified welder. I mean, that is, I'm not making it up. I knew Brooke for 2 weeks before she called me anything other than MFer. And Brooke wasn't using the initials, just so you know. But we hung in there, and we loved her. God says that we have to love each other. That's in every major religious text in the world. He doesn't say we have to like each other. He said we have to love each other. And we love Brooke, and it turns out that Brooke started to love us back. One good thing about working with pregnant women, insurance companies are scared to death of them. So every time I talked to them for more time, I made her sound half dead. And we got to keep Brooke for a long time. And as you can see in this picture, it's one of my favorites. She had moved into transitional housing by then. We had her on Tennessee Medicaid. We're not a Medicaid expansion state. We really need to be. I fight for it every day, but it is what it is. I got to work with the resources I have. Either that or run for office, and I'm not going to do that. So we got Brooke Medicaid, so she's not having to pay. She's doing really well. I remember when this picture was taken, I said, Brooke, you're going to have to, you're going to have to make sure your OBGYN is nearby. I can deliver this baby, but it'll be ugly. And so she did that. And I just love this picture. I love the look on her face. But Brooke wanted to go back to Ohio. And I was really scared about that because she had a good community in Tennessee. One, she had me, and she had the people that work with me. We loved Brooke. Brooke couldn't do anything for us. We loved her. And she didn't have to pay for anything. She didn't need a job right now. She needed to work on her own recovery. She needed to work on being a mom. And so we had Brooke on one Subutex a day, but she wants to go back to Ohio where her family is, her mom, Angie. And she doesn't have the support system there that she did in Tennessee. And for MAT in Ohio, they didn't have clinics that would take her Medicaid. So she's going to have to pay $125 a week to go in and simply have a doctor write her prescription. And she's out the other end with no help for underlying mental health disorder, no help with her underlying trauma. And I promise you, Brooke's got a trauma history as long as my leg that my Sunday school class don't want to know about. Okay. She's not going to have any of that. So I'm really worried about this transition, but she did go back. She's living with her mom, Angie. Angie and her took this picture right before Brooke gave birth. They're in the delivery suite, as you can see in the background. And I love this picture. Look at Brooke. Brooke is a stud. I mean, she's a supermodel. And then look at that picture, and then look at this one. All right, guys, this is stuff to get addicted to right here. This is good. And I love Angie. Angie, you would always guess that Angie daughter is Brooke because she looks like she just kind of budded off of her by asexual reproduction. Look exactly alike. And I love this picture. So Brooke gave birth right after that to this little thing, Ava. So Brooke had these pictures made. Her mom, Angie, sent it to me. But Brooke starts to struggle. She's got a couple of old felonies from her use, not violent crime. She didn't murder anybody. She didn't use a weapon, and nothing like that. This was secondary to possession in amounts that were deemed intent to resell. And so she can't get a job as a certified welder. Brooke should make $35 or $40 an hour, even in Tennessee. And so she's working where she can, mainly in service industry jobs. COVID comes along and basically wipes those out. And so now we take a marginalized population who needs connection and relationship, and we marginalize them even further, which is exactly what happened. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been done. I'm just telling you what happened. And it predictably, as Joe said earlier, our overdose deaths skyrocketed over 90,000 in the pandemic year of 2020. In Tennessee, our overdose deaths were up 46%, which is the sixth highest in the country. And guys, when you take a marginalized population and you isolate them, that's what you're going to get. And we have to be smarter than that. And we have to figure out ways to make that connection happen. It's not just about access to treatment and medication. So Brooke sends me this picture. She's starting to struggle. She has a couple of slips. She can't afford to go to the doctor who's writing her medication because it's costing her basically her entire paycheck. And she has a child, Ava. And so she gets arrested. She goes into jail. Jail has nothing to help her. They don't give her mental health medication. She was only on one. And they don't give her Suboxone. She was only on one of those. She decompensates. And she gets out after being detoxed off of all those medications with no follow-up from either mental health or addiction medicine. And last December 13th, I looked down early in the morning, and Angie's number was on my phone. I grabbed my phone because I think it was a Saturday. And Angie said, Steve, I went in to wake Brooke up this morning, and she didn't wake up. So Brooke was born August 31st, 1994. She died December 13th, 2020. Ava, who's now almost 2, will never know her mom. She'll be raised by her grandmom. She's being raised by Angie. Angie had some pictures made recently of her and Ava. She sent them to me. I need to get this on here because the trauma inflicted by the disease of addiction did not stop when Brooke died. As long as Ava draws a breath, the trauma of the addictive disease will carry on. That is an adverse childhood experience for a child who was less than 2 years old when her mom passed away. And guys, I use this story to tell you that this is a preventable death. This is not one where we didn't see coming. A meteor didn't fall out of the sky and hit somebody. This wasn't an act of God. They weren't killed in a tornado or a hurricane. This is a preventable death. And I think that it is our responsibility to prevent these types of deaths going forward. I'll miss Brooke. I will talk about her as long as I'm able to. I will keep telling her story because I'm afraid that if we don't do that, that we forget. And I don't want us to ever do that. I'm going to stop sharing here just for a second because I have to get over to my other PowerPoint. And I'm sorry that was a little bit longer than I intended, but it's also a really, really important story. And it talks specifically to what Joe was talking about earlier. All right, thank you, Joe, and guys, thank you for the little break. Wanted to transition over into my slide. The good thing is I only have about 7 slides, but we've got a lot of stuff to get in there. And I'm going to start by addressing a question that Ben Haas put in the chat box. And Ben wants to know that there's several ways to usher a patient into recovery. In my experience, do I see a difference in the patient experience between an opioid dependent and non-dependent pathway? Here in Central Massachusetts, we're seeing providers have difficulty transitioning patients from a harm reduction medication to their original treatment goal of abstinence. Can you speak to your success with that? And yes, Ben, I will, and we'll talk about that going forward. There's a few things you need to know. I am a harm reduction guy, and I didn't used to be that way. My own treatment path did not involve medication other than detox, but I also had very high quality a detox level of care. And then I had 95 days in an inpatient treatment facility that was geared towards professionals, doctors, lawyers, professional athletes that really delved deeply into childhood trauma. So when we start talking about treatment programs, that's the gold standard right there. The problem is that even back in 2004, that was $15,000 a month cash, no insurance. And so $45,000 for 3 months, which might as well be $45 million for a lot of our patients. And so that's why I am such a fan of medication to hold cravings at Ben. I'll explain the role of that going forward here in just a little bit. But the goal for me and not me, the goal for all my patients is abstinence. I want them to be able to live drug free. There'll be some who can get there and some who can't. I have a problem, Ben, whenever we are forcing people into that model before they're ready, before we have addressed these social determinants of health, because I think we get out there and we have this artificial time frame of you should be better by now and not need medication. And I think as long as we do that, we'll continue to stigmatize the use of medication for opioid use disorder. So I want to compare harm reduction in addiction to harm reduction in what we call real medicine. Okay, I'm an internist. I've treated diabetics my entire life, and guys, the treatment of diabetes is harm reduction. I know of nobody that we treat that we cure their diabetes, not one. But I can tell you that we treat them, and the reason that we treat them is so the bad stuff doesn't happen. You don't go blind, you don't lose limbs, you don't have heart attack, stroke, you don't shoot your kidneys. Okay, so that is a harm reduction model. We're treating the underlying disease to prevent the bad sequela of the disease. And that's exactly what we're doing in addiction. It's the exact same thing. And the prediction that I'm talking about is OUD. So the harm reduction model exists in medicine otherwise. It's just whenever you start talking about an addiction that people have trouble with it. We don't treat hypertension or high blood pressure so you feel better. Nobody feels your blood pressure. We treat it so you don't have heart attack or stroke. That is harm reduction. So when we're treating opioid use disorder, we're treating you in order to get the needle out of your arm. We're treating you in order to get you out of behaviors that are getting you in trouble in the criminal justice world. We are treating you in order for you to be able to get your life back and to be able to rejoin your family and to get jobs and become a productive member of society. Those are the goals in a harm reduction model. The medication is just a pathway to there. So does that mean all my patients are on medication their whole life? Absolutely not. I've never told one of them ever that they're going to be on it the rest of their life. So Ben, you're going to have to give me a little bit of leeway here. When I start to see insight and judgment, that's when I know my patients are getting ready. Okay. And if you'll just put that bookmark right there, and we're going to come back to insight and judgment when I get into my brain stuff. So I've been very successful with this. We've gotten multiple patients completely off medication. As a matter of fact, one of my patients who's a little bit different, he's a professional athlete. I got to watch him play the other night on TV, and he's one of those patients that went through that process. He actually played in his career, and people had no idea. And now he has transitioned off mainly because of the use of a drug called Sublocade, which I'll take questions about at the end if you want it. But it makes patients much easier to transition off of buprenorphine into the abstinence-based world because it's released so slowly into the system, and the withdrawals are so mild. So with that said, Ben, if you'll put the bookmark there and remind me when I get to that point to talk about the role of insight and judgment. So, all right. So let's talk about addiction. And so this is really the folks who came to Nashville. This is really the basis of my talk. But after listening to Joe this morning, I really wanted to start the way I did. So if we look at addiction, we learn about it in terms of a biopsychosocial model. So in all of medical school and all of residency, we got 0 hours on addicted disease, none. We got 0 hours on the proper prescribing of controlled substances for both acute and chronic pain, none. And so if you look at doctors in our communities who are writing these pain medications, how did they learn how to treat chronic pain? How did they learn how to treat acute pain? Where did they get that knowledge base? And unfortunately, the knowledge base came from the pharmaceutical industry who had different goals. So I'm going to give you a few book recommendations as we go through the talk. The first one is going to be Empire of Pain by Patrick Keefe, and it details the marketing ploy used by the Sacklers in the promotion of the drug OxyContin. And I think when you look at that, you'll see what happens whenever you have profit-driven companies who are making drugs like OxyContin, because it was, for the company, it was all about maximizing dose, keeping people on as long as possible, and increasing profits and downplaying the risk of addiction, which they knew, despite their promotion of less than 2%, they knew at the time it was 15 to 20%. So that's just a little bit of kind of about how we got there, but I'll give you a few book recommendations to go. Patrick Keefe's book is outstanding. I have no agreements with these folks. I don't get any money from it. These are just things that I've read for my own edification. So I am self-taught when it comes to this. And so what I wanted to do was put together a talk that I could teach the district attorney for the state of Massachusetts and his staff about addiction, or I could teach people at Vanderbilt University about addiction, or I could teach people in jail. And I wanted to be able to use the same talk. So what you're going to see over the next 45 minutes is that talk. So when we learn about addiction in psychology class, usually as undergrad, it's a biopsychosocial model. And I always get squirrely with words like that. They're way too long for my liking, and I don't understand them. But what I do understand is a slot machine. So when I teach addiction, I teach it in the form of a slot machine. And I know how a slot machine works. And I'm not talking about slot machines in Vegas or cruise ships. I'm talking about ones in mini marts. Okay. So when the 3 sevens come down on the pay line, that's when the money comes out the bottom. So we're going to look at addiction in terms of a slot machine. So the first 7 represents the bio part of the biopsychosocial model. What is your genetic risk of addiction? About 60% of addiction is inherited. Those of you who are on this call already know this. If you've been working with families, you see it riddled throughout the family. So 60% of it is DNA, one chromosome from mom, one from dad. This is sperm and egg stuff. We can't change that, but we can assess risk based on that. So the first part is the biology. So if I'm assessing Joe, who's broken his leg, and I need to know what Joe's risk is of misusing this prescribed controlled medicine that I'm going to write him. States have written all these rules around prescribing, and those things are good and they're needed. But I'm going to have about 15 minutes to see Joe if I'm lucky. And I don't have time to go through 55 single-space typewritten pages that are written in legalese. I need to be able to assess Joe's risk. So when I'm teaching prescribers and students and actually practicing docs and physicians, assistants, and nurse practitioners, this is what I teach. I need you to be able to do this in about 5 minutes, okay? So I'm going to ask Joe about his own history of substance use. Now, people have a lot of shame and stigma around that. They don't want to tell you, right, because of the baggage that it brings, and they think they'll be treated differently. So I never get very far with that. The most I've ever had anybody admit to drinking is 2. That's the most I've ever, no matter what their blood alcohol was, they only had 2. So what I do is I end run around it. Joe, tell me about your family history. All right, Steve, my dad, and this is not true, Joe. I know this, but my dad struggled when he was younger. He had some substance use disorder. He got treatment for it, but unfortunately, before he got treatment, he and my mom got divorced. So I was raised in a single parent household with my mom. And so right now, I know that Joe's first 7 is on the pay line. Okay, he has a genetic risk of substance use disorder simply from getting a chromosome from his dad who has addiction. Okay, the second 7 is the psycho part. It's what kind of household we were raised in. Now, I don't want anybody under any illusions. We got about 70 people on this call, and none of us came out of a normal household. But some of us came out of places that are worse than others. Some of us came out of places where there was physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And this is where I want to talk about the term ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And Joe couldn't have said it any better. That's why I was going through all kinds of emotions as I listened to him. We are going to move the needle on addiction when we shift our focus from treatment, which I'm all in favor of, to prevention. I'm not saying we pull resources from treatment. We need that because we need to restore families. But for every dollar we spend in prevention, we get $7 to $11 downstream in savings. It gives us the most bang for our buck, and I almost never hear anybody talk about it. And it's just amazing to me. So when I hear prevention in Tennessee, it's all about Narcan, and I carry Narcan, Joe, just like you do. I've got it in my book bag. I got it in my office. I got it in my desk drawer. I've got it everywhere. Narcan is not prevention. Narcan is death prevention. The horse has left the barn on addiction a long time ago with Narcan, and I'm not displaying it. We need to keep up those efforts. I'm talking about primary prevention. I'm talking about preventing that at-risk child of using before age 18. Because if we can do that, we can decrease their chances of developing full-blown addictive disease greatly, even if they experiment after age 18. So we get the bang for our buck in prevention. And so the good thing is we know what the risk factors are, right? We can identify these in these children early on, particularly in our school system. And I'm going to tell you some stuff around that shortly. I get excited about it because I love the whole concept of adverse childhood experiences. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. ACEs, lead author, Dr. Vincent Felitti. It'll change the way you think about medicine if you read it like I did. So that second 7, I've got to find out from Joe what kind of household he was raised in. Did he have physical, sexual, or emotional abuse? If he did, that second 7 is on the pay line. The third 7 is just the social opportunity. What is widely available and socially acceptable? That's it. So you've got this genetically primed, trauma-based, at-risk patient who's just waiting on whatever that salve is that we're going to apply to it. All right. And here's the weird thing. And I didn't know this. The part of our brain that senses pain, okay, it's one location. And that same location in our brain that senses pain is the same location that senses both physical and emotional pain. Okay, think about that for a second. So how many times, and this is true for me, how many times do I have something that I hurt, like my back? You know, I work out in the gym, I pull a muscle in my back. How many times is that back pain made worse by some emotional pain I'm carrying along with me because I flip it over, I transfer it over into that? So suddenly my back hurts a little more because I'm dealing with this stuff I don't want to deal with. And if I take this pill, or I do this drug that numbs that physical pain, it also numbs my emotional pain. And I didn't know that. Okay, so let's get off of Joe for a second and let's go back to me. In my story, I started out using 2.5 milligrams of hydrocodone one day after work when I was a chief resident. I'd already been to medical school. I'd completed almost 3 years of residency. I was getting ready to step out into the world. I was nervous. I was having trouble sleeping at night. We didn't have work hour restrictions, so I was overworked. Didn't like my wife very much. My kids were young. I thought they were a pain. And so I had all these things going on in my life that were emotional. I pulled up to a red light in front of the liquor store in my hometown of Johnson City, flipped open the glove compartment of my truck while I was sitting at that red light, and I had some old Norcos in there, hydrocodone and acetaminophen. We know them as Vicodin. And I looked at those things. I said, you know, my patients take these things all the time. And I had them left over from a dental visit. He inflicted some pain, gave me a handful of medicine. I didn't use it, just threw it in my glove compartment of my truck, which illustrates a couple of things about prescribing and drug take-back programs. And I'll let you just read into that. So I broke 1.5. I threw it in my mouth. I lived about 10 minutes away. By the time I got home, suddenly my job stress was less. My wife, I liked better. My kids were better behaved. My work hours weren't bad. What really changed in that 10-minute drive? Nothing. What did change was I altered those pain sensory pathways in that area of my brain, which wasn't about physical pain. It was about emotional pain. And guys, within 3 years, I was using 500 milligrams of OxyContin and 8 milligrams of Xanax every day. And I was taking care of your family members in the hospital, in the ICU with serious diseases. I wasn't living under a bridge. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't in jail. And you all have this problem in Massachusetts. You have 10% of your healthcare providers and your doctors and nurses that will have some form of addictive disease at some point in their career. And we have to be able to identify and help them, because if we don't, they're underground and they have the potential to harm a lot of folks. So I'm a big fan of addressing this and getting people help and getting them back into their lives, you know, even from a professional standpoint. So for me, I had this genetic predisposition. I had a long line of people in my family with substance use disorders, 18 first cousins on my line in our family tree. 4 of us have died from overdose or alcoholism before age 40 years old. So the first 7 for Steve Loyd is no question. The second 7, the psycho part. And my mom is a great grandma, by the way. She's still alive and I love her. But growing up, my mom was abusive. She was abusive to me and my sister. And I'm not talking spankings, I'm talking whippings. Okay, that's a good Southern word, a whipping. Belt, buckles, sticks, tobacco sticks. I had to explain to a group of students the other day what a tobacco stick was. But tobacco sticks, right? And this is over the top. You know, I'd have flashbacks of watching my mom wail at my little sister, holding her up with one arm, and my little sister at 2 and 3 years old trying to fend off the blows with her offhand. I was a victim of sexual abuse. My favorite uncle started molesting me when I was 5 and went on to worse things as I grew older at ages 6 and 7. And guys, I never told anybody any of this stuff. And the truth is, if it wasn't for addiction, I'd still be carrying this emotional baggage around. And I learned to deal with it. And I'm able to talk about it with you guys without it being this you know, boogeyman in the closet. So Steve Loyd's risk of misusing that prescribed controlled substance, which was in my glove box, which I had for a legitimate reason, is greatly increased. I've got the genetics. I've got the childhood trauma. Okay, now all I'm waiting on is a socially acceptable opportunity, and nothing can get more socially acceptable than something a doctor writes. And that's where the Sacklers and the pharmaceutical industry normalized the use of pain medication that made it widely available and socially acceptable and set us on the pathway that we're on right now. If I look back at Joe, and I've got Joe there with that broken leg, now I've got to address Joe, because Joe tells me that, Steve, when my parents got divorced, my mom had several men in and out of her life. And as I got to be a teenager, those men didn't like me so much. And there was some physical abuse. So now I've got Joe sitting here with a genetic predisposition of a chromosome from his dad, a traumatic family upbringing at the hands of men that were in and out of his mother's life as he was growing up. And now I'm getting ready to write a prescription. I'm getting ready to throw the match on the charcoals that's already been primed with lighter fluid. And so before I write that prescription, Joe's got a broken leg. He's going to need pain medication. I am not saying he doesn't, but I've got to have a conversation with Joe. I said, Joe, I've got to write you this pain medication. It's going to help you. We got your leg fixed, but there's some things you need to know about it. And the thing you need to know most about it is potentially addictive, particularly in somebody who has your family history and your upbringing. And that has to be entered into in a conversation. Because what I want for it to happen is for Joe to realize that he develops a problem with this pain medication. I want him to run to me, not away from me. If he runs away from me, I can't help it. If he runs to me, I can help it. I'm still going to write the medication. I'm going to write it for 3 days, and I'm going to explain to him why I'm writing it for 3 days. And because I need to reassess it that 3 days to see if it's still needed. Because here's a statistic that I think you'll love. If Joe comes back to me and he's still having pain, and I choose to just blindly write that medication instead of looking at what the underlying source of the pain is, his chance of still being on that medication a year later is now 60%. When you write that second prescription, no matter how short the first one is, the chance that your patient's still on it a year later is 60%. So that's a great inflection point. People got all over the CDC for those guidelines. They're spot on. They couldn't be better. And we darn sure don't need to roll them back, because now the companies are saying, oh, you need to get off of this prescribing stuff. People are dying of heroin and fentanyl. Remember what I told you, 70 to 80% of them started out with prescription pain medication. We absolutely do not need to relax the prescribing guidelines. Okay, we absolutely don't, but we need to have conversations with our patients. And so I'm going to tell Joe, if you get done with this medication, you get a few days down the road and you find yourself wanting it, or you find yourself getting it from friends or looking in medicine cabinets, remember 70 to 80% of the people get the medication free from friends or family the first time. They don't get it from a doctor or off the street. I need you to run to me because we can help you. All right, so now let's talk about the difference between dependence and addiction, because it's going to be really important in Joe's case. Dependence means when I stop taking it, I get sick. That's it. It's not addiction. I can get anybody dependent in 14 days. Okay. All I got to do is write them a medication where you develop a physiologic dependence. Not every drug produces a physiologic dependence. Okay. Opioids do, benzodiazepines do, alcohol does, methamphetamine does not. Okay. Cocaine does not. So when people stop taking methamphetamine or cocaine abruptly, they don't get dope sick. Now, emotionally, they're going to be down here, but they don't get dope sick. So I've got to explain this to Joe. Joe, when you stop taking this medication, you can get sick for a few days. And generally, that's not a problem. It's mild. You maybe get a little sweating, maybe a little bit irritable, but it passes. Okay. And if that happens, that's fine. If you stop taking it and you're going to go through that, that's fine. Now, that is dependence. What is addiction? Addiction is the continued use despite consequences. Now, I know I've got people on this call from the treatment world. I know that I have all walks of life on here. I know that you've got these big assessments you do to determine whether or not somebody has addiction, and I'm not knocking any of those. I'm not. And I use them as well. Audit C, cage questions, the personality profiles, do all that stuff. But I'm going to tell you all this. If you want a shortcut, look for continued use despite consequences. When you see continued use despite consequences, there's a problem. I'm going to bat about 800 with that. The second DUI is not an accident. The first DUI could have been, and I'm not condoning it, but the second DUI is not an accident. Why? Because you spent 48 hours in jail. It cost you 10 grand for an attorney. In Tennessee, we publicly shame you by taking your mugshot and putting it in a little magazine and selling it at the mini mart. Okay. So those are consequences. That second DUI is not an accident. That second DUI is likely an alcohol use disorder. So look for continued use despite consequences, and you'll do really well at diagnosing addiction. So let's go back to Joe again. The difference between dependence and addiction is the phenomena of cravings. People with the pure dependence don't develop cravings later down the road. And they're the same cravings that you all have for food when you're hungry and water when you're thirsty. Only the person who is addicted to the substance, their craving is about 10-fold stronger than your cravings are for food when you're hungry. So when I get people telling me, oh, Steve, these people just need to put it down, they need to quit, I say, okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I agree with you. I want you to stop eating. And I don't mean today. I mean, stop eating. Okay. And I'm going to explain to you how that happens here in just a second. So, and the last thing I want you to take away with regards to cravings is people don't relapse because they're dope sick. People relapse because of cravings, cues in their environment that set off the dopamine pathways in their brain that drives them to the end use. People relapse because of cravings. So with opioids, if we had a way to stop cravings and keep cravings at bay and give people a chance at long-term recovery by treating their underlying issues, we can't do anything about the first 7. We can do a whole lot of stuff about the second 7. Then we're going to start cooking with gasoline. It's the best we have right now, a harm reduction model, but it can also lead to abstinence-based recovery if we're doing a good job at addressing social determinants of health. All right, so let's concentrate on the brain here briefly. I'll give you the short and skinny on this one. Two areas I want to concentrate on. One is, Casey, you can shake your head. Can you see my arrow, Casey? Okay, thank you. So the first area of the brain we're going to concentrate on is what's encompassed by my arrow, and we're going to call it go. And then the second part of the brain I want to concentrate on is this right here, the frontal lobe of our brain. We're going to call it stop. Okay, so the go part of our brain is our limbic system, and I don't know who came up with the terms for neuroanatomy, but I'd like to get to them because they named it awful things: globus pallidus, putamen, ventral tegmental area, all Greek to me, right? I get go. Okay, so the go part of our brain, the limbic system part of our brain, is the part of our brain that we feel pleasure. Okay, it's the part of the brain that has two big responsibilities. One, it's responsible for our will and our desire to live, and two, it's responsible for our species going forward in time. Okay, so the things that lead our species to go forward in time had better feel good or we won't do them. So what leads our species to go forward in time? Number one, we got to eat and drink and live to be reproductive age. And number two, we got to have sex. If we do that over a big enough population for a long enough period of time, assuming we don't blow ourselves up or a virus doesn't wipe us out, right, our species will go forward in time. Okay. The other thing is it's responsible for our desire and our will to live. And this is what I really want you to understand here. How can a mom leave her child in a car and go across the street and use methamphetamine in a hotel room? I'm not condoning that. We have to take action to protect that child. I'm not condoning that at all, but I understand the behavior. Okay. And when I started to understand the behavior, it took me to a whole new level of being able to empathize and be able to help my patients, because our limbic system is responsible for our desire and our will to live. How strong is that? What would you do to save your own life right now? If we were all together in a room in Massachusetts right now, and we taped the room off and we got rid of all food and water, and we just sit there and looked at each other day after day, we're gonna start to have some pretty peculiar behaviors. We're gonna go into survival mode. We're gonna drink each other's urine, guarantee it. We're gonna look around and see which one of us is the weakest, because that's the one that's gonna get eaten first. That's how strong that desire and will to live is. Now, in addiction, what happens is that goal of desire and will to live is replaced by whatever the substance you're addicted to is. That's the key. Okay. I wanted to quit more than anything in the world. I love my kids. It wasn't enough to make me stop using. Okay. I love my wife. It wasn't enough to make me stop using. I love my job. Guys, I grew up in rural East Tennessee. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and I went to med school. I make more money in a year than my daddy made in 10 years as a trucker. My mom was a mail carrier. I have everything I ever dreamed of. I've got cars sitting in my parking lot that as a kid, or my driveway as a kid, I never would dreamed I could drive that car ever. It didn't matter. I had to have this or I would die. What would you do to get the thing you think you'll die without? And I'm telling you, you'll do anything. I'm not condoning it. I want you to understand the behavior. The thing that leads us to be reproductive age is eating and drinking. Does eating and drinking feel good? Yes, if it didn't, we'd all stop doing it. Every time you ate, you threw up your toenails, you stop eating, right? So eating and drinking feels good. Does sex feel good? Yes. If sex didn't feel good, nobody would do it. So that's the reward system of our brain. Food, water, sex, right? All good things. So here's what happens when you eat. Okay, you take a few bites, and you take those few bites because you've had a craving, same as a drug craving, only 10 times less. That's going to lead you to an action that's going to make you feel better. You have euphoric recall. So you haven't eaten in a while. Your body starts to tell you hadn't eaten in a while. Cues in your environment tell you it's time to eat, right? To get in your lunchtime. That's noon. You didn't eat this morning. You get a little sweaty on your skin. You get a little empty feeling in your pocket. You even have emotional changes when you're hungry. And there's a term for it. It's called hangry. So you get hangry. And you remember the last time you ate, and you knew when you ate, it made you feel better. So you are driven. Now, I could drive your cravings up even more by putting you in a room and bringing in some hot food and let you smell it, right? I'll drive those cravings up even more. I teach you this, guys, because this is what happens to somebody struggling with addiction who doesn't have the tools that they need to take care of their cravings, right? Because their cues are the dope man. Their cues are the phone number on their phone. Their cues are these feelings they get when they've had a period of abstinence. Right? It's the same thing as our cravings are for food when we're hungry and water when we're thirsty. So you take a few bites of food in the reward system of your brain. You make your own heroin, you make your own fentanyl, you make your own oxycodone, hydrocodone. They're called endorphins and enkephalins. They attach to the opioid receptors in your brain, and it leads to the downstream release of dopamine. And everybody on this call loves dopamine. Now, I've seen Joe take at least 3 swigs of some kind of sweetened canned beverage since I've been on this call. All right. I know it's there. Everybody in the room, that's exactly right. So you can't function in the morning until you get your coffee, right? You're stimulating yourself. You like that feeling of dopamine. It gives you an overall sense of well-being. Now there's some caffeine things there and stimulants that we'll get into in another talk. So my point is we all do this every single day. It's how we work. So then that dopamine's taken back up into a nerve ending, and then it's released whenever something else comes along to stimulate its release. And that drives us to eat and drink. We live to be reproductive age. Sex feels good. We do the same thing. So everybody agrees that food, water, and sex are good things, right? Can you think of an instance where they're not? And I'm not going down the sex route. Let's go down the food route. Anybody ever tried to lose weight? Right? I weighed 250 up until a few years ago. Tried every diet in the world known to man. I was even a vegetarian for one afternoon. Okay. None of it worked. So a few years ago, I decided I'm going to watch what I eat and exercise every day. And I've done that. I weigh about 200 right now. Kept it off for that number of years. So here's what happens. My goal is to lose weight and get in better shape. That is a frontal part of my brain function. The stop system of our brain gives us insight, judgment, and empathy. Okay, go system is all about pleasure. Stop system is all about insight, judgment, and empathy. Guys, our body wants to do something called homeostasis. Our body wants to stay the same. If you don't believe me, what do you do when it's cold outside? You put a coat on. Why is that? Because you get too cold, you want to be at an optimum level of temperature. You want to be homeostatic. Okay, this is just another example of homeostasis. So food, water, and sex are good things, but there's some downsides to the food part, and there's some downsides to the others as well, but we're gonna stick with food. So I work out every morning. I work out at a little gym called Orange Theory. I burn about 800 calories in an hour. Good workout. On my way home, I pass a Krispy Kreme donut. I love Krispy Kreme donuts. I'll dream about them. My mouth's starting to water right now. So when I drive by that Krispy Kreme donut, what does the reward system of my brain tell me? Go get it. You know what it's like. They're hot. I have euphoric recall. What's my goal? My goal is to lose weight and get in better shape. The frontal lobe of my brain that gives me insight, judgment, and empathy tells me, hang on a second, Steve. I know you like Krispy Kreme donuts, but each one of those donuts has 220 calories and 20 grams of fat. Unfortunately, guys, that's true. Those are real numbers. Not much of a problem. I'm going to have 880 calories, 80 grams of fat, just blew my workout. Okay. So now I can make a decision that gives me the most amount of pleasure with the least amount of consequence. Guys, you all do this all day long in your jobs every day. Joe has situations come across his desk where he makes decisions every single day, and he has to pick the one with the greatest benefit and the least amount of consequence. If I took away Joe's frontal lobe of his brain and it was just based on pleasure only, Joe, I want you to think about what kind of decisions you'd make. You'd be in jail in short order, okay? No question. All of us would be. So that's how our frontal lobe of our brain is stopped and the go system of our brain interact, okay? So I drive by the Krispy Kreme. Krispy Kreme knows all this. How do I know? They blow the donut smell out in the street, right? Trying to increase my cravings. They turn that little sign on that says hot donuts now, right? So they're trying to overcome my frontal lobe by stimulating my cravings. Same thing the dope man does. The same thing that cues and triggers in our environment due to those suffering from substance use disorder. People relapse because of cravings. Guys, here's the deal. The stop part of our brain and the go part of our brain are not neurologically connected until we're 23 years old for a woman and 25 years old for a man. This is why your teenagers make horrible decisions. Okay, but here's the kicker when it comes to substance use disorder. Those connections are arrested in development at time of first use. So I'm talking to Joe, and Joe's 30 years old or 35 years old, and he's using heroin, and he's giving me answers to questions, and I'm getting madder by the second. How in the world can you think like that? What are you thinking? I stop myself every single time. I said, Joe, how old were you when you started using? So Dr. Loyd, I was 15. I know that from a brain development standpoint, I'm dealing with a 15-year-old and not a belly button 35-year-old. Okay. Now, if you don't believe any of what I just said, I want you to look at this slide. This slide is the second most important slide I have. These are PET scans of brains. Don't get intimidated by PET scans. PET scans just look and see where radio labeled sugar goes. All the cells in your body work off sugar one way or the other. This top row of brains are brains that are normal. You see the uptake in the frontal lobe and all throughout the brain. Second row of brains are brains that have been detoxed off of drugs. So Casey, I'm going to get you. So Casey comes to me. She's young. She's 25 years old. She's pregnant. She's injecting heroin. I bring her into our facility. I medically detox her for 10 days. All right, Casey, you're not going to get dope sick. I'll see you. And I turn Casey loose back out into the world. And this is the brain that I just turned Casey loose with. What do you see in the uptake in the frontal lobe? Nothing. I've essentially given Casey a chemical lobotomy Remember, all lobotomy is severing connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of your brain. So Casey's reward system is still functional. All the cues are still there. All the dopamine's still there. I've gotten rid of insight, judgment, and empathy. How long does Casey last? Hopefully, at least until she gets out of the parking lot. But I'm going to tell you that most of the time, they don't even last that long. The person picking them up has what they need, okay? Or they get triggered within the first few days or few weeks, and they relapse. And then we look at them like, well, what in the world did you do that for, right? And we start getting on them, and I look at you and tell you that's an insane way of thinking because it's predictable. We have to understand that. We have to step in and help folks. Guys, this is why it's so important with our jail programs. Why do people relapse? Cravings. How long do cravings last? Your entire life. Lasts a lifetime. I am 54 years old. I've been in recovery for 17 years and 4 months. Okay. I still have cravings. I'll probably have one today. It won't be bad, and I'm probably not going to use. Okay. But I've had a long time in recovery to do that. We have to help people keep cravings at bay until the frontal lobe of their brain can recover so they can have insight, judgment, and empathy. And part of that brain development is about addressing underlying trauma, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So I send Casey back out in the world with this. She relapses. Now let's take a look at Stephen Loyd. I had 95 days of treatment, 5 days in an inpatient detox unit. So I'm essentially at 100 days. Look at what starts to happen at 100 days in recovery. Look what starts to come back in your frontal lobe. I'm now starting to develop insight, judgment, and empathy. I'm a doctor. I now have community and relationship. The president of my university didn't fire me. The dean of my medical school paid me the whole time I was in treatment. I've got this wonderful support group that I'm walking back into, and the best friends that I have in my life, I've made in the last 17 years in recovery. That's what we're talking about, creation of that community. And I was able to do that because the system was set up for me to do that. Doctors have a 78 to 95% sex success rate at 5 years in the treatment of substance use disorder. We don't bat that with strep throat. And it ain't got anything to do because they're smarter. It has everything to do with the system that they walk into. And I want us to understand that because that's the system we need to be creating for everybody else. And the best place to do that is the criminal justice system. So how long does it take to go from this bottom row of brains to this top row of brains? 2 years. It takes 2 years. Guys, this is not, I'm not making this up. Everything I have will be referenced. This is one of my medical Mount Rushmore folks, Nora Vocal, who is the head of NIDA. This is her work, and this is not even new. This is old. This is 1993. That was 2 years before Casey was born. Okay, this is old stuff. Okay, we've known this for a long time. Let's treat this as a chronic disease that it is. And we know that if we use drugs like Vivitrol, like Suboxone, buprenorphine, naltrexone, methadone, we can keep cravings at bay. And as part of a comprehensive treatment program where we're addressing these social determinants of health, we can get people from this bottom row of brains to this top row of brains. And that's beautiful. So Ben, back to your question. How long do people need to be on it? I don't know. I look for the return of insight and judgment. When I see people start to have those glimpses, and I think Amy talked about it, those brief moments of clarity. When I start to see that, and I start to see it happen pretty consistently, I know my patient's ready, and we're going to have addressed those social determinants of health to give them a supportive recovery environment that they can function in. And here's the good thing: I think it's doable. I really think it's doable. I don't think we're going to lose. I think we're going to win. I just want to minimize the number of people that die in between now and then. All right, so the second 7 stuff, another of my medical Mount Rushmore guys, this is Dr. Vincent Felitti, lead author of the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. He started this work in the 1980s. He's a weight loss doctor in California. He would have morbidly obese, mainly women, but some men. They would weigh 400 or 500 pounds. They would lose the weight. Some of them would put it back on. He targeted the ones that put it back on. And he had developed a list of 10 questions because he thought it was secondary to trauma. And one question in particular got his attention. And the question was this: how much did you weigh the first time you had sex? And the answers he got were 40 and 50 pounds. And he knew he'd asked the wrong question. What question should he have asked? How old were you the first time you had sex? These women had all been sexually abused within their own family. And this is the important thing to remember about substance use disorder, guys. The drug, the substance is not the problem, it's the solution. The problem is the underlying stuff I just gave you. The solution is the drug. What were these women's drugs? It was food. What was their solution? It was food. If they ate enough, they could make themselves physically unattractive to their perpetrator. It's the solution. Stephen Loyd sitting back at that red light in Johnson City, Tennessee in 1999. What was the solution? What was the solution to my problem? It was oxycodone. It was hydrocodone. That wasn't the problem. It was the solution. We need to flip the narrative, because we can have every pain pill prescribed as exactly as it's supposed to, and nobody ever abuse it. We can get rid of all heroin and fentanyl. Okay. People will mood alter with something else. And there will be an illegal market created for it, because the iron will of the market will happen. We are not going to move the needle until we start to address it, the underlying causes of addiction. And I love Dr. Felitti. So I'm going to give you a brief biochemical model of trauma and how it relates to the brain. So I've given you one book already. I'm going to give you a second book. The second book is Dopamine Nation by my friend, Dr. Anna Lemke. And it explains the role of dopamine in our daily lives. And here's the deal with trauma. Chronic trauma and stress causes the release of something called ACTH. It's a great big long word, but it's a corticotropin releasing hormone between your pituitary gland and your adrenal gland. Okay. ACTH stimulates the release of something everybody on this call has heard about. It's called cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone for that reason. What's the chemical that makes us feel good? Dopamine. That's what everybody's after. When Joe took his child to school this morning, even though it made him late, okay, he still gets pleasure in that. That pleasure he gets of hanging out with his child is dopamine. Okay, so dopamine makes us feel good. Cortisol decreases the response to dopamine. So we want to live in a balance between pain and pleasure. Our pain, our stress tilts us this way. Now we need some pleasure. What will bring us pleasure? Drugs from the outside that stimulate dopamine release in one form or another. Methamphetamine, oxycodone. Guys, we're self-medicating. And most of the time we're self-medicating chronic trauma and chronic stress. And it's just the way it is. So if we want to treat that, it's just like treating Joe's blood pressure and hypercholesterolemia so he doesn't block his heart off and have a big heart attack. We got to treat the underlying disorders. I'm going to tell you a brief story about a school here in Nashville. And this is usually tough, and I don't put it in unless I have time for it, and I have time for it today. You all know me a little bit now, and even though you just see me on the computer, you probably have, hopefully I've shown you inside of me a little bit. So I want you to think about what kind of student you think I was growing up in Jonesboro, Tennessee. What kind of student was I in grade school? How do you think I did? I was a terrible student. I was the kid that was a chronic discipline problem. I was the kid that the first day of school, because they didn't have computer assignments, the teacher got up and you were all sitting in the gymnasium and they read your name if you're in her class or his class. And I was the kid the first day of school that my new teacher already knew my name because he or she had talked to my teacher from last year. I was that kid. And I'm not knocking any of the education, I'm grateful for my teachers. I'm grateful for the people who put me where I am in my life, but things could have been better. And I think we need to look at that. Because what was happening to Steve Loyd in his house? What was happening to him? He was being physically and sexually abused and emotionally abused. My mom had untreated bipolar disorder. I was a pinger. I walked in the room. I got to figure out what her temperature is so I know what my temperature is so I don't act one way so she doesn't go off and I protect me and my sister. That's not the job of a 7-year-old. That's emotional trauma. That's me. I acted out at school. How did the school system respond? We had partitions in our school back then. This is the 70s. Partitions, we didn't have classrooms. And so they would bring me around to the edge of the partition so multiple classrooms could watch me be spanked. So they knew if they had that behavior, that's what would happen to them. I got put in jail. Did that change my behavior? No. What it did was it made me determined not cry no matter how many times them some bitches hit me. Just did. I'm not going to cry. And I didn't. And I had some people who believed in me and who pulled me out of that situation later on in my life and put me where I am today. But I want to explain that because I want to contrast that to an elementary school here in my adopted hometown in Nashville, Tennessee. I'd encourage you all to go to YouTube and in the search engine YouTube, put in Fall Hamilton, F-A-L-L, Hamilton, as in Alexander Elementary School. There's about a 10-minute video on there of Fall Hamilton. Fall Hamilton is a Metro Nashville public school. It is down near the fairgrounds in West Nashville, which is one of the highest incarcerated zip codes in the United States. And I watched that video and I went, surely this can't be true because this is a trauma-informed faculty. This is a trauma-informed principal. They have a trauma coordinator there that knows what kind of neighborhoods and what kind of homes these kids are coming out of. You've got to be kidding me. So I did what I want to do. I got in my car. I drove down there. I discovered several things. One is you can't just walk in an elementary school anymore. So after I got through that process and they realized I wasn't a psychopath, I go walked around all day, mainly with tears in my eyes, because I saw these kids coming out of places where their families had been incarcerated. And a lot of them coming out of homes where substance use disorder ran rampant. A lot of them were being raised by single grandparents because their parents were both dead from either things that they had done in the community or drug overdoses. And I watched them as they misbehaved and they acted out, and I watched how they were redirected. Guys, that's where we'll move the needle. We know who these kids are because we know who their parents are. We know what kind of households they're coming out of because we have data. We got to target these kids. We got to get to them. We got to help them with their trauma. They don't need to be 48 years old like I was before I got help with my physical and sexual abuse. I got lucky. I had a few breaks go my way. There's no difference between me and those kids. That's the kind of thing we need. And we need our politicians to understand that doesn't happen on a 2 or 4 year election cycle. Politicians love Narcan. Why? Because they change the curve quickly. And that's a good thing. We'll know if we're successful on this one, the next generation. You want to talk about planning for the future. Let's invest in this. The last 7 is this. It's a social opportunity. What I have in front of you is the entire marketing campaign of Purdue Pharma. Purdue Pharma said studies in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that OxyContin had less than a 2% chance of addiction. It was a lie then, it's a lie now. Here's the study they reference. And from your area, all right, Dr. Jick and Dr. Porter were at Boston University Medical Center back in 1980. They had 11,000 patients in their hospital who received the narcotic pain preparation while they were in the hospital. They followed them when they got out. Only 4 of them became addicted. That's not even comparing apples to apples. And this certainly is not a double-blind placebo-controlled study that we base clinical decisions on. And it's the entire marketing campaign of Purdue Pharma. And if you look at the Hulu series Dope Sick, you will see this play out in real life. And that's exactly how it happened. So now you have a picture, the first 7, second 7, third 7. You have a picture of the role of trauma as it leads to addiction, and this whole idea of pain and pleasure being in balance, a yin and yang homeostasis in our body. You understand our reward system, the frontal lobe of our brain, and you understand frontal lobe disengagement and frontal lobe recovery. All that stuff is really cool stuff. It helps us to better help the people that we are trying to intervene on and help them find the path to recovery that's right for them. If you want to stay up at night and be worried about something, here it is. This looks like a Percocet, a 10 milligram Percocet. It is not. Percocet is oxycodone, which is 1.5 morphine equivalent. 10 milligrams would be 15 morphine equivalents. The problem with this Percocet pill is it's carfentanil. Carfentanil is fentanyl that was made to anesthetize rhinoceroses by the Johnson & Johnson company in the early 1970s, never intended for human use. It's made and manufactured in clandestine labs in China and Mexico and brought into the United States and pressed into pills that look just like what our patients are taking, like they come out of the pharmacy. You have this problem in Massachusetts. You have this problem all across the country of heroin being adulterated with fentanyl. And you think you're taking 15 morphine equivalents, and carfentanil is 10,000 morphine equivalents, and you die. 1 grain of salt will kill you. This was bought at a local shopping center here in Middle Tennessee several years by an undercover TBI agent. They also see 6.5 grams of carfentanil. I can fit 6.5 grams of carfentanil in my front jeans pocket, right here. 6.5 grams I can fit in there. That's enough fentanyl to kill half of the population of the county that I live in here just outside of Nashville. Fentanyl, the illicit fentanyls are killing our folks right now. The tolerances our kids are developing to this fentanyl are unlike anything I've ever heard. Outside of the book Dope Sick, I'm going to turn you on to this one, fresh off the presses. It's called The Least of Us. It's written by my friend Sam Quinones. Sam Quinones wrote the book Dreamland. Sam eloquently describes what's happening right now with heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine in our communities. Methamphetamine is adulterated with fentanyl. Do any of y'all know why? Because methamphetamine does not produce dope sickness. So you can take it, do what you're going to do, and then you don't have to take it again, right? Because you get sick. If you mix it with fentanyl and you continue on a daily basis, the people will get dependent upon the fentanyl. And so when they stop using the meth, They will subsequently stop using the fentanyl. They'll get dope sick and they got to go back to the dealer quicker. Sam does a great job of explaining that. The neat thing for me is I knew that before I read Sam's book because I talked to my patients, right? And I talked to dope dealers. It's just good to see that it's really true. Last slide. This one is the one that's important. This is the one that matters right here. I'll tell you that if we could move the needle 10% on this picture across our country, we could fund anything we wanted to fund with the money that we save. This is my family. This is my son, Heath. This is my now daughter-in-law, Laura. She was Heath's girlfriend at the time. The blonde here, who looks really sweet and nice, but who I promise you is tougher than a pine knot, is my wife, Karen. I still had a little bit of peach fuzz back then. That's me, but I want to concentrate on this side of the picture. If you look in the background, that's Florence, Italy, and there's the Duomo. I hope I get to see the Duomo again before I die. It's my favorite place on earth. And as a little boy growing up in Jonesboro, I never dreamed I'd see the Colosseum in Rome or Tuscany out of my brain. And I got to do all of that. And that's why I want to tell you about this picture. And Joe, I don't know if you have a daughter or not. Do you have a daughter? You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have three.
Yeah.
Three daughters.
Three,
It starts
right?
way getting you back.
It is, and everybody told you to save for college, but everybody forgot to tell you about saving for a wedding. And I've done that one. I would much rather save for the wedding. I'd have been better off. But every dad that has a little girl, and I know this is misogynistic and sexist, and I'm sorry. When Heath left, it was tough. When Haley left, it was devastating. And so every dad that has a little girl knows that one of these days somebody's going to take her in one form or the another. And I knew that Haley's entire life. Every morning of her life, I kissed her on the head. I told her she belonged and she mattered and how much I loved her. Recovery gave me that, and I got to pass that to my daughter. And so Haley goes about her life with this in the background. And when she's a junior in high school, she's got a date to the prom. And this thing right here shows up on my front porch. Haley's getting dressed and not ready yet. And I'm hoping really to be able to scare him off. He's a senior. I talked to this kid for about 5 minutes. I walked into my kitchen. I said, "Hey, Karen, I think I just met our son-in-law." And she's like, "Come on, Steve, they're in high school." Sure enough, I was right. And a few years later, I'm standing at the back of a long aisle with a preacher at the other end of it. And I'm at a day that I've dreaded my entire life, or Haley's entire life. And right before we walked down, Haley put her head over on my shoulder. She said, "Daddy, you're the first man I ever loved. Thank you for everything you ever did for me." The day got good in a hurry. Wow. Really good. And the kids have never seen this, and Heath's never seen this talk. And they don't know I use this picture. At that moment, my gratitude went up even more because I knew in the program that night that I was not in parentheses. I'm not two dates. I'm May 11th, 1967 dash. I didn't die in 2003. I got to be there on the most important day of my daughter's life. I got to stand beside her. I got to walk her down the aisle. That's what we're trying to do, guys. And I wouldn't have got there without the high quality treatment I got, the community that I had supporting me, a dean of my medical school and the president of my university who said, "Steve, we think you deserve a chance." I wouldn't have been there. And that's what we're after. The pandemic did a couple of good things. One is it got rid of traffic in Nashville for a little while. The second thing that it did is still going on in my house. It restored the family dinner table. We are huge sports fans. And we spend our dinners in front of the TV. But then we didn't have sports on TV anymore, and we started eating dinner together again. And so in March of the pandemic, we still do it now. They're all coming over tonight, by the way. So in March, everything in Tennessee shut down. My son is getting ready to get married in October. And he walks into the dinner table in March and he sits down and we're all sitting there. And he said, "Hey, Pops," he calls me Pops. He said, "Hey, Pops, would you be the best man at my wedding?" My son played college baseball. He has 100 buddies that still eat in my house in one form or another. And he asked me to be his best man. That's what we're after, guys. Everything that Joe talked about to us leading this off, the things that Amy is trying her best to do, the things that Chris's parents are wanting to happen as a result of his death is about this picture right here. And I'd ask you not to forget it. And with that said, Joe and Amy and I'm done. I appreciate your time. I think I came pretty close to finishing on time, and just thank you for the opportunity to be here. Hopefully you took away from it what you need.
Dr. Loyd, thank you so much. No, when all else, I was brought up with a message, when all else is trouble, when all else fails, all you're going to have is family. So that is exactly what matters. I can't thank you enough for as much as you share with us today, because I know that some of it's going to be awfully hard. And thanks for the lesson, but most of all, thanks for the passion and the purpose. I mean, you want to create an army, get 10 people with passion. Forget paying 100 people to do something. Get 10 people with passion. You can get rid of the other 90. You brought me to tears when you're talking about the dog. I put my 8-year-old on the bus today. She can stick out her tongue at me and tell me how mean I am. It doesn't matter. But thank you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Loyd, there
Thank
is
you.
one question, and I actually think it kind of fits in with this, with all your gratitude, but that's, guilt is a powerful trigger that causes relapse when one is in recovery. Any advice on how to deal with the guilt before it turns into a relapse?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I look at guilt and shame differently. Guilt is I've done something wrong. It's all of us. I would think that we're probably talking a little bit more about shame. Shame is there's something wrong with me. And that's different than I've done something wrong. And so when I see people who are struggling in chronic relapse, a lot of times it goes back to shame. And shame actually has a gift on the other side, believe it or not. It's called humility. So when I'm working with patients who are covered in this shame, and we'll use shame and guilt together for, just because that's how the question was phrased, that's where the importance of community and relationship come in. And it takes a while to build that. The hardest thing I have to do with my patients is getting them to reach out and ask for help before the event, right? They're on something that I call the slippery slope before the slippery slope, right? And I want to reach them then before the event happens. But if the event happens, I can't turn my back on it. I see people kicked out of program. What'd you do with them when I kicked them out? Really? Where are they going to go? Okay, I've got a second chance now to help them see what their trigger is. I still have shame, but my shame right now kind of helps me put me in my place, because if I'm not careful, I'll stick my chest out and think this is about me. And so I have to be constantly on guard about that. And when I'm shown that, that's humility. And so the shame is there's something inherently wrong with me. So I would tell you that I think there's two big things. One is we have to get to the core of that shame. And a lot of times that shame is trauma related. And so helping people realize that they belong and they matter. The second thing is establishment in that community, whatever it is. It could be 12 steps. I love 12 steps. I still go. Matter of fact, the last time I was in Boston, I hit several 12-step meetings and I made some wonderful friends. So I do it everywhere I go. But it's other than 12 steps, right? There's Celebrate Recovery. There's churches. There's other spiritual organizations out there. Sometimes it's just a group of people that you open up and you share yourself with. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the work of Brene Brown. I would encourage you that she's written multiple books. The first one is the best, Daring Greatly, which came from a Teddy Roosevelt quote, but she has a TED Talk. So if you're more of a 17-minute person rather than a week-long book person, her original TED Talk at TEDx Houston talks about this greatly. So when we can open up ourselves and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and allow people to step into community and relationship, we'll be moving. So those are my targets and what I try to do with my patients to help with guilt and shame.
With regards to the trauma, and just a couple of thoughts I wanted to finish. I know Liz wanted to get that question out of the way, but you talk about the school, the trauma-based school. I mean, that seems leap years. We're rolling out a handle with care to get to the student, but I don't know how you got people or Fall Hamilton Elementary School got legislators to buy into trauma. That's prevention and intervention at its best. And one of the other, I mean, you mentioned Sam Canones. Believe it or not, Sam was the speaker last speaker we had on before you. And we started our task force in 2015, but that least of us quote from Matthew, and he said he wasn't a religious guy, but faith had such a big part to play in recovery. And that's one of the themes and messages I hear everywhere, where you talk about the different parts of the brain and that connectivity. And I almost wonder sometimes if it's faith. Sam seems to try and suggest that it is that faith that brings back the front and the portion of the brain, the back part of the brain together and binds it tightly. I don't know.
Okay, Joe, I wasn't going to go here. I'm a little bit scared. Okay, but
no, it's all right.
If you look at community and relationship, and I hate to get into chemicals, but there's a neurotransmitter in our brain. Don't get scared of neurotransmitters. It's just how cells in our brain talk to each other. Okay, but there's one particular one that plays a big role here. It's called oxytocin. And like I don't know about you all, and I've been with you for about 2 hours now. I've enjoyed my time, and the truth is, I'm a little bit giddy. And that's oxytocin, because we're in relationship. So when you're in relationship, in community, your brain releases oxytocin. Humans, as an evolutionary step, humans are made to be in community, because as caveman, if you got off by yourself, you got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, right? So oxytocin is a way to keep us in community, because if we don't have that, and we don't feel good when we're around other people, we give them the finger and we go off and isolate ourselves. So I believe, Sam, because that's part of this pain pleasure thing. So we've got this pain. Community actually is pleasure. It brings us in relationship together, because I love this. I've loved getting to know the folks I've got to know this morning. So I believe Sam is right. And Sam, he's not a religious guy. He says he's not, but it's not about religion. This is about spirituality. And those are two different things. I told you the church I grew up in. And I remember the story from the Bible where was it Saul's family is leaving Sodom and Gomorrah, and God told them not to turn around, and they turned around, and Saul's wife turned into a pillar of salt. And then I'd have somebody tell me, come by and say, God is not a vengeful God. And I'm sitting there looking at that going, it sure as the heck sounds like he is. I mean, to me, that seems pretty vengeful, right? You're trying to.
Yeah.
And so what I had to learn, Joe, as time went on, is we'll move into New Testament stuff, and it's really all religions, but you know, I go to a Christian church, but Jesus all his work on earth was about forgiveness, was about meeting people where they are. The woman at the well who was a prostitute. And so I think it is about that. And I think that there's actually a neurochemical basis to it. So I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. When I'm doing talks, I talk about this all the time, and I didn't put it in this one. But if you look at every major religious text in the world, the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Quran, I can't pronounce the Hindu text. It's really, really long. I can give you the East Tennessee pronunciation, but it's bad. All of these major religious texts have one thing in common, and that's love your neighbor. The Jewish rabbi Hillel in like the 11th century said, love your neighbor. The rest of the Bible is just commentary. And when I heard you talk earlier, that's what I hear. And so I think that is the basis of what we do. It's the basis of what's done at Chris's house. I
agree. And it's funny that my church, you know, I'm a Catholic, but at my church this week, and I don't want to go down this road either. But it was the gospel was love your neighbor. And the message we preach as we go to the schools is golden rule to all of these kids. And we try and identify and make it a purpose. If you wouldn't do this or want this done to your younger brother or sister, don't do it to anyone else. And there's just one other thing. We have an employee, Diane Reed, lost a nephew a couple of weeks ago, a young man to addiction. And I see Eileen Lovejoy has lost son to substance use disorder as well. And you give strength, you give hope, you give purpose. Please keep, doing what you're doing. I'd love to have you back sometime, because this isn't going away in the next year, but we can get better. My father, the reason I got into politics was my old man. He always said, Joey, you can always make it better. That might be a good note to end on, unless you want to add anything else, Dr. Loyd. I just am so appreciative that you accepted our invitation to be here and, talk to the people, talk a little bit different than you and yours down in Nashville. But thank you so much for being here.
Joe,
thank you, Dr. Loyd.
Can't thank you.
So many positive comments here. So many. Everybody has really enjoyed your talk. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, I'll sign off with one thing. I'm exhausted. I am tired.
Thank you.
But thank you all. Thank you for sharing your morning.
And I'll share one other thing with you. There was a lawyer who said to me one day, if you can get out of bed, if you can enjoy going to work, help people and make a buck doing it, you're a success. And thank you. Yeah. Thanks, doctor. Thanks, everybody, for being here today.
Thanks,
Take
Dr.
care.
Loyd. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Case.
Thanks, DA.
Thank you.